Our next speaker, Laurie Marker, received her PhD in zoology from Oxford University and is the co-founder and executive director of the Cheetah Conservation Fund. Among her many awards and honors include being recognized by Time magazine as one of its heroes of the planet and receiving a gold medal from the Society of Women Geographers. I understand she's also the keeper of the International Cheetah Stud Book, which sounds like a fascinating read. Dr. Marker is considered the world's foremost expert on cheetah biology and an innovator in strategies that build local support for wildlife protection and habitat restoration. The 2010 Tyler Prize for Environmental Achievement is being awarded to her in recognition of her work in Southwest Africa to address the social and economic needs of subsistence livestock farmers and, at the same time, to protect the endangered cheetah and to restore farmland and wildlife habitat. Dr. Marker's nomination for the Tyler Prize was initiated by Jeffrey Bader, U.S. Ambassador to Namibia from 1999 to 2001. In his letter of nomination, Bader commended Marker for building constituencies for cheetah conservation among groups that previously had been in conflict. Bader described her as literally and figuratively both a force of nature. And he went on to describe the Cheetah Conservation Fund as a special blend of scientific research, environmental conservation, activism, and constituency building that is rightly a model for biodiversity projects. Ladies and gentlemen, 2010 Tyler Prize laureate, Laurie Marker.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and it's a huge honor to be one of the Tyler Prize laureates. I'm going to talk with you about cheetahs and actually restoring large landscapes in Africa. Cheetahs are very special. I hope by the end of my talk you'll also consider them very special, but also a model for large predators and ways that we as humans have to live together with nature. Cheetahs are the fastest of all the land animals. They can reach speeds of up to 70 miles an hour. They're a sprinter, very short distances, and they're very, very unique. There's nothing in the world that can actually reach the speed of a cheetah. The biology is also quite special. They're considered to be an asocial predator, although we've found them much more social in Namibia and Africa after the years that we've been studying them. Female raises her young up to about 18 to 22 months of age. She can have up to 6 cubs, but usually only 3 or 4 make it to adulthood. Males usually live together in coalitions or brother groups, and they do come together in very large home ranges. There are a lot of odds against the cheetah, though. They don't breed well in captivity, and you did hear that I do run the Cheetah Stud Book, which is a registry of all cheetahs living in captivity. But there are only about maybe 1,000 cheetahs living in captivity, and only about 100 cubs are born a year. This is something that's been going on forever, and what got me involved in Africa to try to save the cheetah. After humans learning about cheetahs for over 5,000 years, and yet them not breeding well, we kept loving them to extinction by bringing them out of the wild. An interesting part for the cheetah, too, is that they are genetically similar. Much of our research back in the early 80s showed that the cheetahs lack genetic variation, and our continued research follows up on much of our genetic work. And many of these issues then cause the cheetah to be much more vulnerable to the ecological and the environmental changes that are going on around them. So those are just some of the few odds. But there are a lot of other challenges facing not only them, but all of our other wildlife in the world. The loss of habitat and suitable prey for a predator is critical. For cheetahs, they don't do well in protected game reserves. There's conflict with the other large predators in game reserves, lions and hyenas that kill their young, steal their food, and that's pushed them primarily outside of game reserves. And about 90% of the cheetahs are found not in protected areas. That then puts them in conflict with humans and livestock. And we as humans don't like predators, and we don't like anything getting our livestock, and therefore conflict is quite severe. With that, then trying to maintain a viable population in a human-dominated landscape, especially in Africa, which has a lot of poverty, is quite complex. The cheetah once roamed throughout Africa, Asia, India, 100 years ago, there were about 100,000 cheetahs. Now there are only about 10,000 cheetahs left in the world. I live down here in Namibia, and that's where the last large remaining population of cheetahs are. There's about 3,000, and we've been able to grow that population in the last 20 years since setting up our foundation. The main problem for cheetahs throughout their range is their ranges are fragmented. We heard from Stuart about the fragmentation and the problems facing most of our world's wildlife. But cheetahs' lands are very fragmented. 10 to 50 animals are separated by human settlements, urbanization, agriculture, game ranches, livestock ranches, and traditional pastoralists. And it is quite difficult for an animal that has such a huge range living in this mosaic of Africa today. These are the faces that I face regularly, and to most of the Africans, the benefits of wildlife are very limited. They look at an animal and they think, what value does it have? I can eat it, it's eating my grass, or if it's eating my antelope or could eat my livestock, then it's definitely a problem. So those are the people that I work with closest, the Africans. And how do you actually describe to people that an animal like the cheetah really actually is helping maintain healthy ecosystems? All of our predators are. And how do we tell people worldwide about this? The ranchers in Montana, or the farmers in France, or those down in Brazil, about the importance of our keystone predators. But they do help maintain and feed all of the different ecosystems. And sharing this kind of a story with farmers is rather interesting. In Namibia, ranching supports about 70% of our country. And this is the range of the cheetah right in the primary area of cattle country, our commercial livestock farmlands. And that area there is about the size of California. And this is the area where our cheetahs are found, and the area that I spend much of my time working within. Also in Namibia, unlike most countries, it has 90% of the cheetahs found on the farmlands and not in protected areas, but also we have 70% of our wildlife game species that are also found on these farmlands. Very different than most places. Most places have their wildlife in a protected game area. Our wildlife is found throughout the country, and that's where our cheetahs are as well. And this is where much of the conflict has been. When I started going to Namibia in the 70s, farmers were killing cheetahs. They were catching them in captured cages. And between 1980 and 1990, about 10,000 cheetahs were actually killed and removed, about 800 or so a year. Well, nobody really cared about that. I was in America, and I was running a wildlife park and trying to know more about this species, and going over to Africa and hearing this and seeing this from the farmers, I thought somebody must care, and one of those large organizations should probably do something. And if I told enough people, maybe somebody would care about the cheetah, and nobody did. So I set up a foundation and then moved to Namibia to work with the farming community. And what I did is I went door to door, and I started meeting with the farmers, and I wanted to know all their stories, how they farmed. I wanted to know what kind of livestock, where their water was, what kind of wildlife there was. And I mapped it all out, and I wrote a book on it and presented it back to the farming community, and I learned everything that you could know about how the cheetahs were killed and where they once lived. And from that, the farmers actually helped develop the programs that our foundation research revolves around today. Our program was the first long-term and comprehensive study of predators outside of protected lands. So back in the 70s and 80s, it was great to be able to go and watch animals in game reserves. They're very beautiful. I knew what cheetahs looked like. But I decided to go and brave it with the farmers and talk with them and learn about what their problems were and teach them more about the cheetah and how possibly they could live with it. So to save the cheetah means actually learning to live with the cheetah. We've taught farmers about the use of livestock guarding dogs, an old breed from Turkey that is raised up with livestock, and farmers can use this to protect their stock. Our dogs now are very famous. They're not that much used in Turkey anymore, but from Namibia they're starting to go back throughout areas where livestock is needed to be protected throughout Europe, throughout South America, Africa, and here in the United States as well. Our education of students is very important. Our young students that are here, you're very critical, and the world is yours, and we're just trying to take care of it. We're having a really rough time with it. But I spent a lot of my time with young people worldwide. I also spent a lot of time with farmers, and I've developed a program called Future Farmers of Africa. And the farmers of Africa don't really know much about the things that we go to universities here for, to become a farmer. They're subsistence farmers, and they don't even often know the difference between a virus or a disease or a tick or a vaccination versus giving a dewormer. And from Namibia, we're now working with range countries through all of the Cheetahs range and trying to train professionals in proven methods to try to help the cheetah survive in the different countries. Much of what we've done is develop a population censusing program and techniques. We've worked a lot with radio telemetry, with spore tracking, camera trapping, to learn more about how the cheetahs live. Cheetahs are found in very huge areas, and we don't get to really see them much, except if a farmer's caught them in a cage trap and calls us. But beyond that, we're trying to actually find out more about how the cheetah lives through our research. As we've found, that cheetahs have the largest home ranges of one of 3 animals on the earth, the elephant being the largest, and the cheetah and the wild dog being the 2 next largest home ranges. About 1,600 square kilometers, and this is a home range map showing some of the different home ranges of cheetahs. Each one of these little squares in the middle is about 10,000 acres, and a cheetah's covering about 20 farms that size. And so if you look at the kind of conservation program that we're looking at, it's trying to look at large-scale conservation that will provide economic values and allowing cheetahs to live on farmers' lands. So the scope of what we're talking about is quite large. In ecology, we've learned a lot from the radio telemetry on how the cheetahs select habitat. And this is quite important because from much of our TV we watch, we see that cheetahs love to run in open areas, and that's because people can see them and videotape them in the Serengeti. But we've actually found that cheetahs are found in more thickened areas, in bushed areas. But cheetahs do like to actually see what they're hunting and have open areas where they can possibly find higher densities of prey. And we've found that cheetahs really prefer in these large home ranges to see areas that have greater visibility and more of a grass cover. But a lot of the areas where cheetahs are found is in thick bush. So a lot of what we've learned is that habitat and prey on these farmland ecosystems are really critical to cheetah survival. But Namibia is quite interesting. It's an arid country. We don't get very much rain. But in the last 100 years, there's been a lot of overgrazing from cattle farmers. And from this, and we see overgrazing worldwide, we've had a huge vegetation change over this 100 years. And this is called bush encroachment. So we've gone from a savanna habitat like this to such thickened thorn bush, thorns that are about this size that you can hardly even penetrate and get throughout about half of our country. And this is all the cheetah rangeland. So this last area where the cheetah is found is into an area called bush encroachment, which is a form of desertification. The impacts of this, we've seen a decrease of the land productivity of about 26 million hectares. It's really affected our social economy by about $100 million US annually by loss of land, loss of productivity. And we've seen cheetahs actually go blind. We've found a difference in our biodiversity of the kinds of lands that the antelope will be on, as well as the birds and the reptiles. And as I said, the cheetahs have been hunting through this thick bush, and we found many of them going blinded in the eye from scratching their eyes in this thick bush. And from that, those animals then go catch livestock and become livestock catching animals. So somehow I ended up in this bush encroachment circle and thought that we could probably do something with it. We started modeling our habitat, the suitability, to look at what could we possibly restore the habitat? And by looking at a home range of a cheetah, this is some of the areas where they spend most of their time, in this brown area in the middle, and we started looking at that. And many of it was an area that was high use, which was a visible area, versus a very thickened area that the cheetahs wouldn't go into. And started also looking at this whole dynamics of how the landscape had changed from good rains and droughts and overgrazing in the farmers. And put together a model that started looking at habitat restoration. And we wondered if we could actually restore this 26 million hectares of land, and if we could we bring some of the habitat back to this grassland habitat that was there 30, 40 years ago? And if we could, possibly, could we put people to work in doing this, and would there be benefits of doing it? And economically, could we actually pay for this habitat restoration? So we started a bush project, and it is a 100% Forest Stewardship Council certified program. And I want to stress the importance of certification programs and how important consumers can be to help save many of our different species. We developed a harvesting process, and then we developed an extruded bush log. So our thorn bushes that have all those thorns go through an extrusion process and come out at the other end with a fuel log. And our fuel log, we've amply called it bush block, with a cheetah picture on it, and we asked people worldwide to help us reestablish habitat. We did win actually the Intel Environmental Award 2 years ago, which was a huge honor as well for Namibia. Some of the interesting parts of this, as we look at selective harvesting, we're now looking at the potential of using our biomass for possibly even biomass electricity. And we could potentially be making cheetah power throughout not only Namibia but into southern Africa, because southern Africa is running out of power, and it could potentially create a major change in how we're looking at some of our electricity. Our Future Farmers of Africa training program is also very important. Again, teaching farmers how not to overgraze, how to properly care for their livestock, to reduce numbers, and if you are not having as much livestock loss, then you're making more money, and you don't have to be killing predators. But as our human populations do continue to rise, we're going to have more and more land that's going to be agriculture land, and we have to learn how to deal with this and look at these human livestock conflict mitigations. And I think Namibia has been quite a model for that work. And with this, we're training international people. For the last 2 years, we've been bringing conservation scientists from throughout the Cheetah Range countries in, teaching them about our conservation programs, our science, so that all of them in Cheetah Range countries can be trained together. We're developing large groups in the different countries and helping so that the cheetah may have a chance. We're teaching our farmers training courses so that throughout Africa we are giving the same and similar messages. We've been able to put over 400 conservation scientists now through our training programs. These are month-long training programs from about 25 countries. And at the same time, we're training a lot of Namibians as well, and many of our Namibian students are now in PhD and master's programs. On another level, looking at beef and the problems that farming causes, that if we could actually get the world to understand that beef farming is a problem for many aspects of biodiversity and actually destroying many of our predators in the world, I thought that maybe we could come up with an eco-label. So I developed a label called Cheetah Country Beef, and I'm working with our Conservancy Association of Namibia and our meat board, and we do sell our beef to Europe, and we're trying to put a price premium on it for farmers who are no longer killing predators, who have developed good conservation farming practices, and by putting a price premium on them, consumers in the world can actually help support good farming methods. This program, we think, is becoming a model for other cat conservation and carnivore conservation around the world, and I think it's not going to be called Cheetah Country. It'll be called probably Predator Friendly, or we've developed another overarching label, which is called Wildlife Friendly. And with this, the certification, we believe, still is going to be very important. So I really ask all of you to consider and think about how certification and putting price premiums back into the hands who are practicing good conservation can be most useful. Conservancies are also an important future for the cheetah. Conservancies are also a model in Namibia where they are large interconnected lands that supported integrated livestock and wildlife management. And with this, then predators can be within a system, and it meets the needs of the people as well as the saving animals like cheetahs and other large carnivores. We're a member of the Waterberg Conservancy, and conservancies now have taken over much of Namibia. About 40% of our country's landscape is now in conservation. From the development of our conservancies in the middle here over to the brown areas, which are communal conservancies, we've actually grown the area for cheetah all across the country, and now we're going into the southern part of the country. So conservancies are an important part, and we think that people around the world are starting to look at this. We are also having people from the United States and the central areas coming in to learn about reestablishing the grasslands and the prairies here in North America from the work in Namibia. We are based at the area called the Waterberg Plateau, which is a national park, which is based right in here. And from here, working with our communities, which are the Herero-speaking, and many of our conservancies here, and this is our Waterberg Conservancy, we're now working with an area of about 2 million acres of land, all in here. And some of the most important areas for the cheetah, the wild dog, which is Africa's most endangered animal, as well as rhinos. And we do see a big future, a future that these greater complex areas can be very important. We can interlink large landscapes together. And these large landscapes are going to be very important for animals like cheetahs, wild dogs, elephants, and all the rest of the wildlife. So although we acknowledge that although there's areas where coexistence can be possible with large predators, we're actually looking at cheetah conservation and looking at the amount of land that's going to be required in order to actually save the species. And the kind of planning we're looking at has really never been looked at a scale that cheetah conservation is looking at, changing the face of Africa. So I didn't know that I was going to be walking the walk for the cheetah, but the walk that I'm walking is trying to actually change the face of Africa and having a place on Earth for this most incredible species. We're looking at reintroductions in Zambia. We've taken over southern part of Namibia now. We're even looking at areas into India and even into areas into the east and in Russia. So the cheetah may have a chance again, and we're very pleased that it does, but putting into practice these processes that I've just talked about with integrating people are the key part to it. Healthy ecosystems actually do provide economic incentives. We need to make those economic incentives and actually show that conservation has to be creative, and we have to make the future for all of these different animals. We're making a difference. We've stopped the killing ecologically. We've helped communities derive benefits from the cheetahs. We are now trying to work to pay for these good farming practices and get our program and our models throughout all of Africa. And for the cheetah to survive, we need to actually work with the people on whose land the cheetah is living and change the face of Africa for the future. So I thank you, and we do have a website, cheetah.org. We are a nonprofit foundation, and all the work that you've seen here has been supported really just through a handful of people in the world who think the cheetah is very special. And I thank those people. I thank my parents for being here, our board members, my partner, Bruce Brewer, and we've got a lot more to do. And thank you for giving me the honor to be a Tyler Prize laureate.